The pandemic has brought new educational struggles for college students, but even before the pandemic, there was a financial struggle throughout the country with student debt since the previous economic downturn more than doubling. Among the organizations pushing for solutions to the problem is Zero Debt Massachusetts. To tell us about their efforts are the group's executive director, Claudio Martinez, and the policy and organizing director, Amy Takinami. Thank you both very much for being with us. I'd like to start with Claudio because, as we mentioned in the intro, this has gotten a lot worse since the previous downturn. And I know part of the solution there is for the economy to recover, but that's still a very big problem. Why is this so bad, the student debt problem?
Well, thank you, Chris. I think the most important thing is to remember that this is a debt of $1.6 trillion nationally, only second to mortgages. Not even credit cards and automobile debt put together come to the amount of student debt that we have in this country. That translates in Massachusetts to $33 billion of debt. And we are trying now to find out, and that's why the city council met on Monday, what are the details in Boston? We have seen tuition hikes for the last 20 years, non-stop at about 4% a year. And that's why colleges today are in and around Boston cost $50,000, $70,000 a year, which is an amount that leaves out a lot of students, mostly Black, Latinx, low income, and first generation, out of an education. And with the burden of having to finance that education through loans.
Amy, what about the loan problems here? Because I think I saw a figure that generally they're expecting a default rate of 40%, but for Black and Latino students, it's a lot higher, isn't it?
Absolutely. Like any systems in our society, the student loan debt crisis, the higher ed industrial complex are all imbued with racism and sexism, actually. So 2/3 of student loan debt in this country, the 1.6 trillion, is held by women. And there are also grave racial disparities in student loan debt as well. So Black student borrowers with a bachelor's degree borrow at 17 percentage points higher than their white peers. Black students are also more likely to enroll in for-profit colleges. 13% of all Black students actually enroll in for-profit colleges, while only 4% of white students do. So there is a predatory aspect to this crisis, in which for-profit colleges, private student loan companies prey on Black and Latinx students in low-income communities, immigrant communities, who don't know that there are different options and that they don't need to borrow at such high rates to get a college degree. So right now, one of the protections we're pushing for is a student loan borrower bill of rights, which I think at this point in time would support those most affected by this crisis. So again, the same communities, Black, Latinx, low-income, immigrant communities who need these protections now more than ever to ensure that they don't go into default and all of the negative consequences that default comes with.
Claudia, why are these rates so high? Is this a reflection of risk, or is this just basically some artificial structuring of options for people?
I think about 20 years ago, universities started investing, honestly, in the wrong things. When I look at Northeastern, and my son graduated from Northeastern University, and I see the big gyms and the luxurious cafeterias and other facilities that don't have anything to do, in my opinion, with a high quality education, sports fields, etc. I worry that we have gone the wrong way for a long time. Also, let's take into account the effects of a Northeastern University in the displacement of a full neighborhood. now is extending into Roxbury as well. I think it's time to rethink what are the key elements of a high quality higher education that's free of loans, and we will realize with a sensitive reinvestment in public higher education, we can turn this around and be able in Massachusetts, of all places, to offer the best options, post-secondary options for all our students.
Amy, what about what's driving that kind of behavior? And I don't think it's restricted to Northeastern. You have prestigious colleges that are battling fiercely to get the brightest students from the families with the most money on the planet. Isn't that what they have to do to get that?
Sorry, do you mind repeating the question?
Yeah, I mean, these colleges spending money on things that attract students, whether it's amenities or essentials, they're trying to get the students from the families with the most money on this planet because they're afraid they won't survive if they don't do that. Isn't that something they all really have to do right now?
I mean, our argument is that no, that we have been disinvesting in public higher education institutions, and that we see education, including, so we call it K through 16 education, not just K through 12, but higher ed as a right. And if we are going to consider it a right, then we need to invest in it as a right and ensure that all students at least have access to our institutions of public higher education, which right now they don't, like Claudio said in the beginning. For average student going to UMass Amherst or UMass Boston, they're still needing to take out $7,000 to $8,000 a year to fill those gaps. And that shouldn't be the case. I think our public institutions, especially right now, students are turning to their local community colleges and their local public higher institutions because they don't want to go back to get second tier private, paying same amount of tuition to take classes online. And what are we doing to ensure that uptick and those students are supported on those campuses right now?
Claudio, in addition to the expense of these loans and the interest rates, what about the collection practices?
They are terrible. Anyone that has a student loan can attest to the issues, the abuses, that misdirection they have received from student loan servicers. And we in Massachusetts do not have any regulations overseeing these particular collectors, student loan servicers. I'm happy to tell you that 3 weeks ago, California has passed a student loan bill of rights. And that is fantastic. San Francisco, a couple of years ago, commissioned a report to understand the student loan debt in the Bay Area. And I believe Boston and Massachusetts need to do the same to protect the almost 900,000 student loan borrowers that we have in the state. This is a basic protections that we should have had a long time ago.
Amy, can you be a little more specific? What would this do for borrowers if we had a law like this in Massachusetts?
Absolutely. So this is common sense legislation, and it would not cost our state very much money. It would ban abusive and deceptive student loan servicing practices like Claudio just outlined, wrongfully steering borrowers into forbearances and away from relief programs like income-driven repayment plans or public service loan forgiveness programs. It would codify minimum servicing standards for companies that handle student loan accounts. And most importantly, it would establish a student loan borrower ombudsperson under the Attorney General's office that would be responsible for reviewing and acting on complaints submitted by borrowers. So right now there is no central office or location where students can go to get the information they need and support. And finally, it would provide public education out of that office to help students and borrowers navigate student loan repayment and default issues. And just to quickly touch on your last question to Claudio, also like these deceptive practices are very well documented. Actually, this May in 2020, Navient, one of the largest student loan servicers, settled a student loan forgiveness lawsuit where the AFT, American Federation of Teachers, alleged Navient systemically misdirected borrowers into student loan repayment and forbearance programs when they should have been getting public service loan forgiveness. So these are very well documented. Lawsuits are happening all the time. And again, student loan Bill of Rights would ensure that basic consumer protections for student borrowers. And California just passed it, as Claudio mentioned, and also 10 other states have already enacted this Bill of Rights. So we would be following suit.
Claudio, what about access to government loans and the way those loans are regulated right now? Anything you could say about how that affects students?
I think to understand the loan finance complex that has been created in higher education is extremely difficult. Our organization had a workshop with the help of the National Law Consumer Center friends, lawyers that specialize in these loans. And it's just incredibly complex and confusing for everyone. One thing that I wanted to mention, Chris, is that the average debt of Massachusetts graduates grew 95% in the last 15 years. 95%. And the Massachusetts is among the 10 top highest debt states, with 60% of our graduates having a $35,000 average debt when they finish school. Something that is crippling and is making these young professionals rethink their ability to start businesses, start families, go to graduate school. This debt is limiting a whole generation of very talented people.
I mean, I also have to ask you if the pandemic is adding to these problems, because right now, especially for students from maybe lower income households, if they have more spotty internet connections, they can't access remote learning as well as some other students. Isn't that going to add to this problem too?
Absolutely. I mean, this pandemic is just exemplifying and amplifying all of these issues that have already existed. Especially in terms of just student loan debt payment. Students right now, our most vulnerable students, are having to decide between paying their student loan debt off or putting food on their table for their families, paying essential healthcare bills, housing. This is why we push for universal student loan debt cancellation, to ensure students don't have to make that decision around necessities that their families depend on and paying their student loan debt. And the forbearance on the interest rates have been helpful, but is not enough because these problems aren't going to go away at the end of the year, let alone in 6 months. Who knows when this crisis is going to resolve itself? But we can't have students making decisions about where they're putting their money.
And finally, Claudio, if people want to find out more information about this campaign that you're working on, you have a website they can go to?
Yes, zerodebtma.org.
Okay, well, thank you both very much for taking the time to join us. That was Claudio Martinez and Amy Takinami from Zero Debt, Massachusetts.